Welcome to Professor Pincushion. In this tutorial, we're going to be doing a retro Butterick pattern, and you can see a lovely example of the dress that we'll be making here. Now, the pattern number for this is Butterick 5880. When you pick up the envelope, you're going to want to make sure you pick up the right size grouping, and you can see that up here above the barcode. Let's take a quick peek at an example of the dress we'll be making. This dress is from a 1951 design that lovingly captures the elegance of that period. It has a loose-fitting bodice with cutout details at the neckline. You'll also notice the front skirt overlay that gathers at the hip. It's all set off with a buckled fabric belt at the waist. If you're unsure of your size, you're definitely going to want to consult the pattern flap, which is at the top of the envelope, and you're going to check out the sizes because retail sizing and pattern sizing is definitely not the same. So if we look at this chart, you're going to see the sizes listed at the top, and then underneath is going to be all the measurements that fit that size. So you're going to take your measurement of your bust, waist, and hip, and these are all in inches here, and you're going to line them up in a column, and whatever column best suits you, that is going to be the size that you're going to be. Flipping the pattern envelope onto the back, the first thing I like to consult is going to be the fabric suggestion. So you can see the fabric that they suggest is designed for light to medium weight woven fabric. So even if you pick a medium weight woven and it's not technically categorized as one of these, it's probably still going to be fine to use. We're also going to need a sew-in interfacing and some lining fabric. Underneath here we have our notions. We're going to need a 12-inch zipper and one 1-inch buckle without the prong. Once you have your fabric, you can then start figuring out how much fabric you're going to need for each item. So the first one, dress and belt, so this is going to be for your fabric. And this is where your size is definitely going to dictate how much fabric you're going to get. So if, for example, I'm doing a size 14, here's the 14, everything underneath the 14 in the same column is going to relate to my size. So this is going to tell me how much fabric I'm going to need. Now over here you see 45 and 60. This is the width of the fabric. If you look at the end of the fabric bowl, it's going to tell you how wide it is. So if you have 45-inch width fabric, you're going to go with this row, and if you're 60-inch, you're going to be going with this row. So if, for example, I'm using 60 inches, I'm going to go across the row until I get to the 14 size column, and it says I'm going to need 3 yards of fabric in order to complete the dress and belt. For our sew-in interfacing, it's all basically the same width. You're going to again go across the row until you get to size 14, and you're going to need 1 1/8 yards of sew-in interfacing. And for the lining, it's the same thing. So they only give you the 45-inch option. You're going to cross till you reach your size, and then I can circle that I need 2 yards of this if I'm doing size 14. Let's pull out the first page of our directions. Now in Butterick 5880, there's only one dress contained in this envelope, so that makes it a little bit easier. You can see the dress here. Underneath it, these are all the pattern pieces that are inside this envelope. Since it's only one dress, we're going to have to cut out all of these pattern pieces. So there is a total of 8 pieces, and they actually number the pieces. So here is number 4, this piece here. When you look at the actual pattern pieces, there's actually going to be a number 4 in there. If we look underneath, it's telling you what each of these pattern pieces are for. So if you look at number 4, this is going to be the skirt front. Pull out your tissue paper and you can start cutting out your pattern pieces for the dress. You can see each one has a number and it tells you underneath what it is. This is the bodice back. So again, this correlates to the list that we were just looking at. Now some of the pattern pieces are going to have a series of lines just like this. Each line is going to be for a certain size. So again, you're going to be consulting what size you are. If, for example, you're a size 10, you're going to be cutting out on this line here. So everything past this size is going to be cut off the pattern. Now if it's a line that has no number or size associated with it, that means it's going to be for all sizes. You can go ahead and ignore these lines for petite or fold line because this is if you're going to make some adjustment. You're going to want to cut on the main outside line here, and you wouldn't cut here for petite. Next, you're going to make sure that you cut out some sort of indication for your notches. So here I have a single notch, and you can either just cut into the notch, not too far, we don't want to cut into our seam allowance. You can cut a little inverted triangle, or you can do like I did, where I do a triangle that's going outside of the pattern. Just some sort of indication to yourself so you know there's a notch here, because the notches are used in order to match our pattern pieces together. Here I have a double notch. So I just cut outward and then I just flatten the top. So I can distinguish between a double notch and a single notch. You'll notice that there'll be several number 1 pieces, and that is because they did a separate one for each size. So to find the size, you're going to be looking underneath the name and the pattern number. This is for size 14. So if, for example, you're doing size 10, you would not need to cut out this number 1 piece. Instead, you'll be looking for a number 1 piece where underneath here it's going to say size 10. After you cut out your pattern pieces, you can then start laying it out on your fabric. So then we can get our fabric pieces to make the dress. So you'll see the layout on page 1, and there's actually quite a few layouts. What they're doing is breaking it down to the width of the fabric and the size you're doing. So you'll see 45, 45, and then we have 60 down here. If you're using 45-inch width fabric, you can ignore the layouts for the 60-inch. Then from the 45, you're going to find the one that has your size listed underneath. So if I'm doing size 14, I can go ahead, ignore this, and then I would just focus on this layout for cutting out my fabric. Now for reading this, the dark shade means you're looking at the right side of the fabric. If it's white, that means you're looking at the wrong side of the fabric. So this is just a single layer of fabric laid out with its width. And then here at the bottom, they folded it out in order to cut these fabric pieces on the fold. And they also give you that clue here. S, this means it's a salvage of the fabric, and F means there's a fold right here. Now this one here, it's salvage, there's no fold. So they just took, after they cut out these pieces, they just cut off the fabric, laid it out single layer, cut it in half in order to fit piece 5 here. So then you can cut out 2 number 5s from this layout right here. Now if you look at your pattern pieces, it's actually the opposite. If it is white, that means it's right side facing up. And if it's polka dot, that means the printed side of your pattern is flipped, so it's upside down with the print of the pattern face down towards the fabric. Now when you pin your pieces or your pattern pieces to the fabric, you're going to place the pins parallel to the edge of the pattern piece. And I like to make sure that I put it pretty close so it's inside the seam allowance. So we're not going to get holes in our fabric. That's going to show once the garment is completed. So just pretty close to the edge. Now I also want to point out here, we have 7, and you'll see it's white. And then underneath it looks like the same number 7, and it's polka dot. Number 7 is probably a piece that needs to be placed on the fold. So what you can do is you can pin 7 right side facing up. You can either start cutting out, or what's even better is just use a chalk, a fabric chalk, and trace around 7. Then you're going to take the piece, you're going to unpin it, and you're going to flip it. So now the print side is facing down. Right next to that piece, and you can either trace or cut it out, and also cut out along your chalk mark for the one you originally did. Because what they want you to do is you're only going to need 1 number 7 fabric piece, but it's going to be double the size of the original piece. So it's just as if you cut it on the fold. For number 6, you're going to have to read it. I'm pretty sure this one doesn't have to be placed on a fold. They just want you to have 2 number 6 pieces. 1 right side up, 1 wrong side down. After the fabric is cut out, we still need to cut out our interfacing and our lining. So that's going to be the next sort of layout we're going to look at. And you can see here, they only have 1 layout for the interfacing. You're just going to lay out your interfacing, 1 layer, no folding, and you're going to cut out number 1 and number 8 here. Next, we have the lining. I'm just going to scoot this down a little bit so we can look at our lining layout. And they only do 45-inch fabric for the layout. You just need to then find your size. So again, if I'm doing in this grouping, I would just look at this layout and I could ignore this one and ignore this one over here. So here we have this layout, and they're going to tell you which pieces you're going to cut out. So we need 4, 6, 7, you need another 6, 3, and 2 of our lining pieces. Again, it's the same sort of thing. They're just laying out the fabric right side up. Down here at the bottom, they fold it. You can see the F for fold. And then the salvages and salvages, that means it's the edge of the fabric. So you're going to cut out 1 6 facing right. The right side of the pattern is facing down towards the fabric. This one over here, it's right side facing up of the fabric. Again, we have another fold here to cut out the piece number 4 on a fold line. And 2 and 3 is also cut out on the fold line. For piece number 7 up here, it's the same thing we did for the fabric. So you're going to pin it right side up. You're going to trace along the outside. Then carefully take out your pins, flip it over so it's butting up right next to where you just did it, and then you're going to outline and cut it all out in one time. So you have a piece number 7 that's double the size of the pattern piece. Now I just want to point out up here, this one looks a little confusing, but you'll see F and F. So they're folding at the top and they're folding at the bottom. So the bottom fold is going to contain number 6. 7 is going to be right on that fold, and then you also have 4 on the top fold as well. The last bit of prep work we need to do is making sure that we transfer our marks from our pattern pieces to our fabric. So we have darts, circles, you have triangles, we have a stitching line. Down here I have a small dot. You need to transfer the ones that are next to your size. So right here at this triangle, you have a series of triangles. I only need to transfer the one that has the 14 next to it. If that's the size I'm doing, I can just ignore the other ones. So what I like to do is, we're going to pretend like this is still all pinned together. I'm going to put my straight pin through the middle of the mark I need to transfer, and I like to make the marks on the wrong side of my fabric. And then I'm just going to use my chalk or my fabric marker, and I'm going to go ahead and transfer. You can see it right here, which I've already done. It's the same thing here with the stitching line. There's a series of lines, but you just have to carefully find your size. So here's 14, and then I'm just going to follow the lines up till I see a circle here, 14 and 14, and then I'm just going to draw a line in between them. So you end up with a single mark like this, and make sure you do it to both sides because this is folded in half. You're going to do the same thing for any darts you have, any circles, and any small dots. If there's a mark such as a triangle like this and there's no size, it's just a single triangle, that means it's for all sizes. You'll also notice on pattern piece number 5, there'll be a series of tuck lines. You also need to transfer those, and for those particular marks, I would make those on the right side. We're going to get started on the directions, but first we're going to consult the sewing information box, and this is going to tell us what the seam allowance is. So in this case, it's 5/8 of an inch unless otherwise indicated. So if they're telling you to sew a seam and they don't state anything special, you always can assume it's going to be 5/8 of an inch. We also have this illustration shading key. This is going to help us kind of figure out what's going on in the picture directions. So you can see what the right side of the fabric is if it's shaded, the wrong side of the fabric or garment is going to be white, and then you have interfacing, which is polka dotted, and then you have the lining, which is white with these little lines here. So we're going to get started at the beginning of the directions. Let me just move this down a little bit, and you can see, here we go. We're going to start with step 1, and I'm going to be reading the steps, and then I'm going to demonstrate for you what you need to do in that step. Step 1, baste front neck interfacing to wrong side of bodice front, stitch darts in bodice front, press down. Here's the fabric piece of piece number 2, and you can see I transferred all my marks. This is the pattern piece that we were just looking at. So this is the bodice front. You're going to want to make sure that you have the wrong side facing up. You're going to take piece number 1, which just happens to be the piece from our sew-in interfacing. And what you're going to do is you're going to pin it to the wrong side of the neckline right here at the top. Go ahead and pin it. And what we're going to do is we're going to baste it in. You're going to baste it starting here, and then you're going to go down the neckline and then across the top here. So this outer curve, we're not basting. It's just the top part where we have the shoulder seams and the neckline. Your basting stitch is going to be the largest stitch on your machine, and you don't have to worry about doing a back stitch. We have to sew in our interfacing because it's not fusible, but it'll eventually be sewn into the seam allowance. Now you could do it at the 5/8 line. I'm actually doing it at the 1/2 inch line. So then it's going to be inside the seam, and if I can't see it or take it out, then I can just leave it. The second part of step 1 is sewing our dart. So this is what a dart looks like. It's wider at the end, and then it comes to a point. So in order to create it, all you're going to be doing, again, you're doing this on the wrong side of the fabric. I'm going to pinch the end of the dart between my fingers, and I'm just basically folding the whole thing in half. So it gets folded in half, something like this. I'm going to put a pin at the very end. And then as I'm just folding this area in half, my little trick that I do is I stick a pin in one side where I can see my line, my dart line. Stick it straight through. I'm going to flip it over to the other side. If the pin is coming out right where my line is, then it's perfect. I can just put it in, and I'm putting in my pins so they're going perpendicular to the folded edge of the dart, and I'm just going to continue until I get to the end. You're going to do it for all your darts for the front bodice. So we have 1, we have 2, and then you have 2 more on the other side as well. So again, I stick my pin through one side in the line, I'll flip it over, and if it's a little off, I can make a little adjustments until it's going through. So it looks pretty good, putting the pin in perpendicular to the edge. So it's going to look something like this, and what you're going to do is you're going to sew directly on your dart line, stitch along, and then stitch right off here. So you're only stitching through this one area. You're not stitching any of this part here until you get to creating this dart. Once you finish creating your dart, you're going to take all your darts and you're going to press them down so they're going towards the bottom of the bodice, away from the neckline. But we'll get a little bit closer so we can show you how I sew this dart. When stitching your dart, you're going to start at the widest point of the dart. So here at the side seam, you're going to do a regular with stitch. Don't forget to back stitch. And then you're going to just follow along your line. And when you get to the end of the dart, you're actually just going to run your stitches right off the fabric. You're not going to do a back stitch because we're actually just going to hand tie a knot. And that'll keep the dart from getting a little bubble right at that point. So I'm just getting to the end here. This is going to be my last pin. So I'm just going to run it right off. Pull this out, keep a pretty long tail, because then here I'm going to take my thread ends, I'm going to form a loop, and I'm going to bring the end right through that loop and pull it, and it's going to create a knot. You're just going to do it slowly so you can kind of make sure that your knot gets pretty close to the fabric, and then you're going to move on and do the rest of your darts. Step 2, stitch darts to bodice back, press towards center. So now you're going to be taking piece 3, and again this was cut on the fold, so when you unfold it, it's twice the size of the pattern, and make sure that you transferred all your marks. So now we're just going to be working on the darts, which is down here at the bottom. You can see one of them here. You're just going to do the same sort of thing. You're going to fold it in half, put in your pins perpendicular, and then stitch on one side of your line, stitching off here and then tying a hand knot. And you can see I've already completed one over here. And then once you finish, you're going to press both your darts toward the center. So this one's pressed in this direction and this one's going to be pressed in this direction. Step 3, pin bodice front and bodice back together at sides. Stitch leaving left side open below large circle. Here's our piece number 3, right side's facing up. You're then going to take the front bodice, which is piece number 2, and you're going to lay it on top of piece number 3, the back bodice, so that it goes right side to right side. What you're going to be matching up is the side seam. So it's this area here and then this area here. So you're going to make sure that this area matches, your double notches match on both sides, and this top corner here matches and the bottom matches. You're going to pin these 2 areas, nothing else, just these 2 areas. And on this side, on the right hand side, you're going to go ahead and stitch your 5/8 seam allowance. On this side here, you'll notice you have a large circle between your 2 darts, which was on your pattern piece. So from this corner, you're just going to stitch until you get to the large circle. That's because everything below the large circle needs to remain open, because this is where we're going to be placing the zipper. Don't forget, you're going to do your seam at the 5/8 seam allowance. Don't forget to back stitch on both the beginning and end of your stitch, and you're doing a regular width stitch. When you finish with your seam, go ahead and press your seam allowances open. Step 4, stitch darts in bodice front lining, press down. So from your number 2 pattern, you also should have cut 1 out of your lining piece and transferred all your marks. So you're going to have it wrong side facing up, because now, just like we did with our other piece, you're going to create your darts. So you can see I have 1 dart here, and same thing as we already did. You're going to fold each dart in half, and then you're going to stitch along the line. So you can see I've already created 3 of my darts. Once the darts are completed, you're going to press them down towards the waist. Step 5, stitch darts in bodice back lining, press towards center. So piece number 3, the bodice back, is another one that you should have cut 1 out of your lining. Again, wrong side facing up, you're going to create the 2 darts at the bottom. You should be an expert at darts by now. Once the darts are completed, you're going to press them towards the center. You can see 1 is already done and it's pressed in this direction. Step 6, pin bodice front lining and bodice back lining together at sides. Stitch leaving left side open below large circle. We're basically just copying what we did with our main fabric. So with our lining, this is my back, piece number 3. I have it again right side facing up. I'm going to bring in the lining piece number 2, which is the front bodice and the lining. You're going to place them so it's going to be right side to right side. Again, you're going to match up the side seam area, making sure the double notches match. This top corner and the bottom corner matches. And you're going to pin on both this side and on this side as well. Now the difference is we're going to flip. So on this side, you're going to stitch from here to the large circle, and everything below the large circle you're leaving open. On this side, you're doing the whole length. So from here to here, you're doing the 5/8 regular width stitch, back stitch at both sides. On this side, you're starting here, the same 5/8 regular width stitch. You're going to do back stitch here, and then you're going to do back stitch here, and everything below the circle is going to stay open. Step 7, turn in seam allowance on shoulder edges of bodice lining, press. Turn in seam allowance on lower edge of bodice lining, press. Here's my bodice, and again, I stitched the back to the front, so it's stitched here on the side and then partially on this side as well. So all they want you to do is on the bottom part of your bodice, so both for the front and for the back, you're going to grab your sewing gauge and some straight pins. And what you're going to do is, it's still wrong side facing out. You're going to measure up the seam allowance, which is 5/8 of an inch. That's why I'm using my sewing gauge. And you're going to pin it up all the way around the whole bottom edge of the bodice. And once it's all pinned up, you can go ahead and press it. You're also going to do the same thing for the shoulder seams. So I would take this one. Now remember, these aren't stitched together, it's just separate. So we'll take the front one, I'll turn it over 5/8 of an inch, I'll press it, and then I'll do the same thing with the back. You're always pressing to the wrong side. So press this 5/8 of an inch and or turn it and then press it, and then you're going to do the same thing on the shoulders of this side. So shoulder, shoulder, and then bottom edge. Step 8. With right sides together, pin bodice lining to bodice matching seams. Stitch neck edge along seam lines and stitching lines, pivoting at small circles. Clip to small circles, trim neck seam, stitch armhole edges, trim, understitch lining as far as possible. So there's a lot going on with this step. So we're going to take it one step at a time. First, you're going to take your bodice piece, and this is the one with the fabric, and you're going to flip it so it's right side out. Then you're going to take the same piece in your lining. Now this is going to be wrong side out, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to slip the fabric inside the lining. So everything's going to match up. And once I put this inside of this one, then it's going to be right side together. For both the back neckline and the front neckline, you're going to bring up the lining so that the raw edge of the lining meets the raw edge of your neckline of the fabric. So if you have notches, like the front has the single notches, you're going to make sure that those match. So you're going to pin all this into place. You can see I've already done the back. And we're going to pin all along the neckline. Now we remember for the lining, we press to the wrong side or 5/8 of an inch. You're going to keep that folded over. So the top of this lining is not going to meet at the shoulder seam of our main fabric of the bodice. Just keep that folded over. And I'm going to do the same thing over here, and then also the back neckline. So I'm going to pin all along here. Then you're going to take it to your machine, and starting at the fold of the lining, you're going to stitch a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Now, remember, we have these little marks from our pattern pieces, and this is going to create that cutout at the top of the neckline of the dress. So what you're going to do is you're going to stitch the 5/8 inch seam allowance. Once you get to the first small circle, you're going to pivot, stitch along your stitching line, pivot again, continue on with that 5/8 inch seam allowance. Come here, pivot, go right along your stitching line, pivot again, come up, and then finish stitching at the 5/8 inch. Don't forget to back stitch. You're just doing a regular with stitch. Now this is only for the front. You're not stitching the front to the back, just lining to main fabric, lining to main fabric. So I would start the same thing over here, the top of the lining where it's folded, and then for the back it's easier because you can just do the 5/8 seam allowance all the way down and you don't have to worry about these parts. Remember, you're only stitching the front and back neckline only. We're not doing the shoulder seams or any other part right now. So I'm starting with the front because I'm going to show you how we do that one triangle stitching area. So I'm just getting to that point now. So there's going to be, right there, it's going to be the edge. You can see I stopped right there. And all I'm going to do is I leave my needle down in the fabric and I lift my foot. So nothing really gets shifted. I pivot my fabric. And then I can go ahead, put my foot down, and I could just follow my line until I get to the end, so the point of the triangle. So that looks about, maybe one more, right there. So again, needle goes into the fabric, foot lifts, and then I'm going to pivot my fabric again. Follow my stitch line until I get to this edge, and then I'm going to pivot again and continue on. After I finish stitching my seams, I like to clip these little notches into the seam allowance for any curved areas, which is normally the neckline. So you can see I've done them here, and I'm careful not to actually cut into my stitches. Then you're going to go ahead and trim your seam allowance, so you're only leaving about 1/4 of an inch to 1/8 left, and you can see I've already done the back here. For the cutouts, you're going to clip down to the point, again, being careful not to actually cut into your stitches. The next part is we're going to do the same exact thing we just did, but we're going to do it for the armhole areas. So this area here, you can see here's my neckline, my shoulder seam, it's going to start this area. So you're going to be doing the same sort of thing. You're taking the front part, you're taking the lining, which is folded over, and you're starting at the 5/8 mark. So not completely at the top, a little ways down. And you're going to pin all the way to the back. So you're going from front to back, and then it's the same thing. This is still folded over, so you're not going up the back. And you're going to do it for both sides. You're going to go ahead, stitch your 5/8 seam allowance, starting here at the top of the fold line of the lining, and then you're going to stitch all the way through one single stitch until you get back up to here. And then you're going to go ahead and trim your seam allowance, and you can see I've already done it over on this side. So the shoulder seams are still not attached. All you're doing is just attaching the lining to your fabric. The last step of 8 is to do the understitching for all the areas we just stitched. So all the seams for the back neckline, the front neckline, and the 2 armholes, you're going to do the same thing, which is the understitch. I'm pulling the lining away from my fabric. I'm looking at the right side of the lining and the right side of the fabric here. You're going to make sure that your seam allowance, here's my seam allowance right here, stays closed, and it's going to be on the side of the lining. So you're going to pull it over. So you could kind of see my seam allowance right here, and I can feel it with my finger, so it's on the side of the lining. That's what you want. You're going to start and stitch right alongside that seam line. So as close as you can get to the seam line without going over into the fabric side. You're definitely staying on the side of the lining. You're doing a regular with stitch. Don't forget to back stitch. And this is what's going to keep our lining on the inside of the dress. So it's going to look like that, and it's not going to keep popping over to the right side. Again, you're going to do this for all 4 areas of the back neckline, the front neckline, and the 2 armholes. The most important thing when you're stitching the understitching is that you make sure that there's nothing underneath your fabric besides the lining and the seam allowance that you're currently working on. We need to make sure that we're not accidentally stitching 2 pieces of the bodice together. Also, some areas may be easier than others. When it comes to the cutouts on the front neckline, it may be challenging in order to get into those cutouts. So you just go as far as you can go, and then once it gets too hard, go ahead and back stitch, cut it off, and then move on to another area that you can understitch. Step 9, turn bodice press. So now you're going to finish turning your bodice so that all the seams that we just created are now within the seam. So we're not looking at any raw edges in the seams we just created. And so your bodice is still inside out, but you're looking at the right side of the lining. What we're going to do next is you're just going to press all the seams that you just stitched with the understitch. So front neckline, back neckline, and the armholes area. Step 10, stitch bodice front to bodice back at shoulders, slip stitch pressed edges of lining together over seam. Now we're going to be attaching the front to the back of the bodice at the shoulder seams. So this is this area up here. Here's our necklines. All you're going to be doing is, and again, you're going right side to right side. You're going to be matching the shoulder seam of the fabric only. You're going to kind of pull this lining out of the way because we don't want to stitch this, just fabric to fabric. So you're going to want to make sure that you match up the edge here, this edge here, and then your single notch in the middle. You're going to stitch a 5/8 inch seam allowance, again, of the fabric only, not of the lining, and you're going to press it open. And I've actually already done that over here. So here's my seam. You're going to press it open best you can, and then you're going to tuck it each side so it goes underneath the lining, like this. And then we're going to get a little closer so I can show you this next part. What you're going to do is slip stitch the two sides of the lining together. So then all this seam allowance is going to be enclosed, and you're going to have a nice finished look with just the lining at the shoulder. The slip stitch is done by hand, so I went ahead and have my needle and thread, and you should use a matching thread so it doesn't really show. I'm just using a contrasting one, so it's a little bit easier to see. You'll see here that I'm on the left side, and I'm just going through the lining sections only. All I'm going to be doing is zigzagging between the two sides. So here I have it in the left side, so I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit of fabric in the right side, and I try to stay right along the fold line, and then pull it so the sides come together. And now that I'm on the right side, I'm going to grab a little bit of the left side. And then pull it together. And then I go back to the right. So I just go right, left, all the way till I'm done with the whole shoulder. Step 11, stitch darts in skirt front, press toward center. So with step 11, we're moving on from the bodice and working on the skirt now. So you're going to get piece number 4, and this was placed in a fold, so you'll get one that's double the size. At the top of 4, you have 2 darts. You're going to create the darts, and then you're going to press them toward the center. Step 12, pin overlay sections together, stitch outer curved edge and upper edge, pivoting across seam allowance at small circle on waist. Clip diagonally to small circle, trim seam. We're going to be working with the overlay pieces, and this is pattern piece number 5. You should have cut out 2. And remember, I told you that you needed to have these tuck lines drawn on the right side. Now that is true. But the one mark that you also need to transfer on the wrong side of your fabric is going to be one of your circles up here at the top, which is part of the tuck lines. There's 2 of them here towards the top, and you're actually going to do just the one, the circle that's closest to this curved edge over here. So just this guy, you're going to transfer it to the wrong side. You're going to take your 2 overlay pieces and you're going to pin them so they're right side together, and you're going to go ahead and stitch them in certain parts. What you're going to do is, where you marked your circle, you're going to start at the raw edge right above it. You're going to stitch down till you get to the circle. You're going to pivot, turn this way, 5/8 seam allowance, regular width stitch, don't forget to back stitch, and then you're going to come along the curved area until you get to this end right here. So you're going to stop at this point and do a back stitch. So again, it's just this area to the circle, and then from the circle, you're going to go up to the raw edge. This area before the circle is going to remain free, and you're also going to trim your seam allowance just like we've done before with our neckline. You're going to trim it. For the curved areas, I would do the little inverted notches, because that always helps for the curved areas to then lay flatter. And up here where you went down from the raw edge and across, you're going to clip a diagonal notch to the circle. And you're going to be very careful not to cut into any of your stitches. Here's a closer look at the top of the overlay. So I stitched down, pivoted at my circle, and then stitched across. Once I'm done, I'm going to trim my seam, and then you can see a notch is going in diagonally towards my dot, being careful not to cut into my stitches. Step 13, turn overlay, press, baste raw edges and along tuck lines. So you're going to take your overlay piece and you're going to turn it right side out. So we have this nice finished edge along the curve, and you're going to press it. The areas that were not stitched, this area along the side here and along the top, you're going to go ahead and pin the 2 pieces together at the raw edge, because we're going to do a basting stitch, which is going to be the longest stitch on your machine. No back stitching, starting here, coming up, going across here. They also want you to do it along the tuck lines. So this is to keep the top and bottom layer together, so we'll eventually be able to do the tucks. So you can either do the outside, perimeter, or like me, I'm just going to do every single line I have of my tuck lines. Step 14, to make tucks and overlay on inside, bring lines of small circles together, stitch. So you're going to take your overlay and we're actually going to look at the inside part of the overlay. So what does that mean? It means that the curved finished side is going to be to your left. The side that has the basting is going to be on the right hand side. So we're going to consider this the inside of the overlay. Now if we look at my basting stitches here, these are the tuck lines, and I just stitched over my chalk marks to create them, and you'll see that they're made up of boxes. So we're going to take one at a time, because we're going to start at the top and then move our way down. We're just going to focus a little bit closer to this area so you can see exactly what I'm doing. If you look at your pattern piece, you'll notice that at the corner of each box, there'll be a dot. So I'll have one here, 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 and here, and the same thing here. So what they want you to do is bring those dots together. So to create a tuck, what you're going to do is, and I'm going to come up, put my fingers underneath, I'm going to take this square and I'm going to fold it in half. I'm trying to match up this line with this line, and it's just like when we did the darts. So you're going to fold it in half. I'm going to grab a straight pin. I'm going to put it right through that corner, check the other side, and make adjustments if I need to make adjustments until it's lined up. And then I'm going to stick in my pin perpendicular to the fold, and I'm going to do the same thing over on this corner. Stick in my pin. Needs to make a few adjustments over here. And we'll say that's good. Everything up here, all this raw edge, just tuck it underneath so it's lying flat underneath the overlay piece right here. You're then going to go to your machine and you're going to stitch right along this line here. So from this dot to this dot over here. You're just going to do a regular with stitch. Don't forget to back stitch. Once this is stitched, you're going to move on to the next box. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just pinching right in the middle because I want to match up this line with this line now. I'm going to take this that's above it and I'm going to lay it underneath. So now this fold is on top and everything underneath it is lying out of the way and flat. And I'm going to stick in a pin, make sure that I'm matching up the corners. And I'm going to stitch right along there. Now this stitch, the bobbin thread, it should actually follow this line right here. So that's what's going to create the stitch and what's going to hold in your tucks. So then once this one's done, then I'm going to move into this one. I'm going to do the same thing. Pinch it in the middle so the tuck is coming up towards me. Put in the pins, take all this up here, lie it underneath so it's flat, and then stitch across here. And I'm just going to go one after the other, starting at the top, working my way down. Step 15, press tucks down as shown, based across folds. So here are all my tucks. All they want you to do is you're going to take your tucks and you're going to fold them so all the fold lines are going down towards the bottom of the overlay. You're going to press this and then you can go ahead and do a basting stitch right across the edge of the fold lines right here. And for the basting stitch, again, that's the largest stitch on your machine, no back stitch. Step 16, with right sides up, pin overlay to skirt front matching centers, base upper and side edges. Here's my overlay. So now we're looking at the front side of the overlay, because before the last two steps we're looking at the back side. So now it's the front side. We're going to have piece number 4. So this is the skirt front. You're going to have it right side facing up. You can see my darts up here. That's the bottom of the skirt. It's right side facing up. I'm going to take my overlay, lay it on top of it. You're going to pin. You can see I started pinning right here. right along the side. You'll notice that the overlay doesn't go all the way to the bottom of the skirt. It starts about right here. So I'm going to pin all the way up here, and then I'm also going to pin along the top here. You're going to want to make sure that the double notch right over here matches at the side seam, and then we have 2 single notches up here at the top. So those should also match in the overlay and in the skirt front. You're only going to pin to this edge of the overlay. So all this extra flappy stuff, you're just going to move it out of the way. This is not going to make it all the way to the other side seam. It's just going to get, I'd probably say a couple inches away from that. Then you're going to baste. So you can start here or you can start at the bottom, but you're going to baste across the top and then down the side. Step 17, pin skirt side back sections to skirt back stitch. We're going to be working with piece number 7 and piece number 6. So out of 6, you should have cut out 2. This is the side back. And out of 7, you had one side that should have been placed in the fold. So you end up with one piece number 7 that's twice the size of the pattern piece. Now what you're going to be doing is you're going to be stitching 6 to 7, and then this edge is 7 to 6. So it goes 6, 7, 6. So I have both my pieces right side facing up. Move my pattern pieces here. So here's 6 right side facing up, 7's right side facing up. You'll see that they have the single notch here. I'm going to flip it. So the raw edges are going to line up. My single notch is going to line up, making sure the top and the bottom also match. You're going to go ahead and pin from the top to the bottom, do your 5/8 seam allowance and press your seam open. And then on this side, let me just shift this down a little bit. I'm going to take my other 6 and do the same thing on this other side of number 7. Make sure right sides are together. The single notch matches, the ends match. And go ahead and stitch that 5/8 seam allowance and press your seam open on this one as well. Step 18, pin front and back together at sides. Stitch leaving left side open above large circle, being careful not to catch overlay. So we're going to be attaching the skirt back to the skirt front, sewing at the side seams. So this is our skirt front. Again, we have this overlay here, and I have it right side facing up, and I'm going to take my skirt back, I'm going to lay it on top of here, right sides together, and I'm going to stitch along the side seam here and the side seam up here. But I want to make sure that I don't get this caught in the side seam. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to carefully fold it back. And you could probably just use a few pins just to pin it to the skirt front so it kind of stays out of the way. So here you can clearly see the side seam of the skirt front. And then I have the other one on that side, which I don't have to worry about. Here's my skirt back. This is what we just completed. I'm going to lay it on top, right sides together, and I'm going to match up not only the double notches on each side, I have one here and then I have one over on that side, but also the top of the skirt portion and the bottom of the skirt portion. And you're going to pin both sides, this side and this side. Now if you're looking at it and you have the skirt back on top, which I do, if the skirt was actually flipped this way instead of being sideways, on the right hand side you'll notice you'll have a large circle. Everything above the circle you're not going to stitch. You're going to leave that open because this is where a zipper is going to be once it's attached to the bodice. So you're going to start here and you're going to stitch down to the end of the skirt, regular with stitch, 5/8 seam allowance. Don't forget to back stitch. On the other side though, you're going to do the whole thing from top to the very bottom, and then you're going to press your seams open. Step 19, open out bodice lining, pin skirt to bodice, matching centers, baste. This is the top portion of my skirt. It's still wrong side out. So now I'm going to grab my bodice and I'm going to put it inside the top of my skirt so that the bottom of the bodice raw edge meets the top of the skirt. My bodice is right side out. So here's my bodice. And I'm going to make sure that when I stick it in here, that it's going in the right direction. So this is the back of my bodice, this is the back of my skirt, and then the front of my skirt is going to be in the same position as the front of my bodice. So I'm just going to slip it in through the top of the skirt. And you'll notice that you have all these notches in the skirt, which should also match the notches in your bodice. So the raw edges are going to match. Now you're only going to be pinning the raw edge or the fabric of the bodice. This lining, you're just going to tuck it in there and keep it out of the way because we're not stitching the lining, just the fabric of the skirt with the fabric of the bodice. Grab my pins here. So double notch in the back. Whoops, I need to shift that down a little bit. Here it is, okay. Double notch, because there's two of them, so I need to make sure they both line up, and then I have this other one over here. Go ahead and pin that. And I'm just basically pinning all the way around because we're going to baste these two pieces together. So then the bodice is then going to be attached to the skirt, and that's what's going to create our dress. We have this opening edge, remember, in the skirt and also in the bodice, so those should match as well. So you're just going from one opening all the way around the whole top and stopping at the other opening. Now we're just basting it because it's just a temporary stitch to hold it, so you don't have to do any back stitching. We're going to do a permanent stitch later. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish pinning this, and then I'm going to baste it. Step 20, stitch darts in skirt front lining, press towards center. So out of piece 4, you should have also cut one on the fold for the lining, which I have under here, and again we have darts at the top. So you have 2. You're going to create the dart, and for each of them, this one and this one, you're going to press them toward the center. Step 21, pin skirt side back lining sections to skirt back lining stitch. We're basically recreating our skirt back in our lining pieces. So out of your lining, you're going to cut 1 out of 7, and then you have 2 of number 6 pieces. So this is the skirt side side back again. What you're going to do is, I have them all right side facing up, just like we did before. You're going to match each side of the 7 piece, so that's the one in the middle, with one of the 6s. You're going to match the top, the bottom down here, and the single notch. Go ahead and pin the full side and stitch your 5/8 seam allowance and press your seams open. Then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take this, I'm going to lay it on this side. I'm also going to stitch that 5/8 seam allowance and press the seam open. Step 22, pin front and back lining together at sides, stitch leaving left side open above large circle. Here's my front skirt lining, right side facing up. I'm going to go ahead and grab the back and lay it on there so I have right side to right side. And you're going to pin the side seams together. So pin this side, I'm going to pin this side up here. And you're going to stitch your 5/8 seam allowance from top to bottom. On the left hand side though, we're going to have this large circle. So again, everything above the circle, we're not going to sew. Everything below the circle, you're going to go ahead, stitch your 5/8 seam allowance from here down to the bottom of the skirt, because this is where we're going to be placing our zipper in the skirt portion. Step 23, with round sides together, pin lining to skirt, base to within 3 inches from side opening edges. Stitch along basting. So now we're going to be taking our skirt lining and we're going to be attaching it to our dress. So this is the bodice. We're still keeping our bodice lining out of the way. So we have the bodice we have the skirt, and here is our seam allowance where we basted the two together. You're going to pull up your lining, and it's going to go wrong side to wrong side. So my dress is still inside out, and we're looking at the right side of the skirt lining right now because we want wrong side to wrong side. And you're going to be pinning the raw edge of the top of the skirt lining with this raw edge of the skirt. So it's actually the seam allowance between the skirt and the bodice here. And I'm starting at the opening that we have, so you definitely want to make sure that not only do all of your seams match for the skirt lining and the skirt, but also the opening is going to match. You have the back of the skirt lining with the back of the skirt. So everything is going to line up, and I'm just going to start pinning here. If it makes it easier, because we're actually going to be stitching the lining to the seam allowance, you can go ahead and take your bodice and tuck it back into the skirt, because we want to make sure we don't actually stitch on the bodice. You're just stitching the seam allowance. After this is pinned, you're going to baste the lining to this seam allowance all the way around till you end back here. But from the opening edge on each side, so this side and this side over here, you're not going to stitch 3 inches from the edge. So with that, I'm going to grab my sewing gauge, which I already have marked at 3 inches. And so right here, maybe I'll make an X with my pins. So that way I know that once I get to that, I'm going to stop. So I'm going to start here, go all the way around, and then 3 inches before I get to this edge, I'm going to make sure that I stop. Now what they want you to do first is you're going to baste the pieces together, so the lining to the seam allowance. And then after you baste it in, you can go ahead and do a regular stitch right on top of your basting stitch at that 5/8 seam allowance. Again, you're only stitching the lining to the seam allowance, so if it's easier, take all this bodice and this lining and tuck it back into the skirt. That way you're not taking any chances. Step 24, unpin skirt lining at opening edges. Stitch remainder of waist seam, keeping skirt lining free. Press seam toward bodice. So here again is the top of my skirt. I just have my bodice tucked into my skirt so it's out of the way. So remember in the last step, 3 inches from the edge, we did not sew the lining down. You can see it's free here and it's free on this side of the opening as well. All they want you to do is on each side, you're going to pull back the lining, and then at the seam line of the waist here, you're just going to go ahead and do a regular width stitch and stitch from where your lining is to the edge at the 5/8 seam allowance. You're going to do it for this side and this side as well. And you're doing it because at this point, this area right here is only basted. So they just want you to do a final stitch just to make sure everything's going to be secured. Once you're done, you can go ahead, take your bodice, you can pull it out of the skirt, and then you're going to press your seam allowance up towards the bodice. Step 25, baste opening edges together along seam line between large circles as shown. Press. I just turned my dress sideways, so this is the bottom with the skirt and this is the bodice, and I'm just pulling my lining to the bodice out of the way. I'm also going to pull my skirt lining out of the way, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking this opening. Remember we had this opening here? Now we're finally going to start putting in our zipper. What you're going to do is you're going to pin the raw edges of the opening together, so front to back, and you're going to baste at the seam allowance from the top of the opening down to the bottom of the opening, and then you're going to press that seam allowance open. Step 26 is in 3 parts, so we're just going to take one part at a time. The first part is whip stitch across upper end of zipper. So here at the top, past the zipper tab, it's all open, and all we're going to do is whip stitch across the two inside parts here so they come a little closer together. So I'm just using some needle and thread. I'm going to bring up my needle from behind, and then all I'm going to do is come over to the other side, bring my needle back up to the original side that I was on. Don't pull it too fast or it might knot up there. You're just going to pull it so they come closer together. Then I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going on the left side, bring it so I'm coming back over on the right side, pull it together. And it's probably better to use a matching thread. I'm just doing a contrasting so it's a little easier to see. Whoops, and be sure you don't get it caught in the tab there. And then once I get to the top, I can go ahead and tie a knot. Next step, place zipper face down on seam allowances, placing zipper stop at lower large circle and centering zipper teeth on basted seam. Turn pull tab up, baste in center of zipper tape, basting across upper and lower ends. So this is our seam allowance that we just basted in the side seam where we had that opening. And I went ahead and marked in my seam allowance where I had the large circles. So this is the top of where I started to baste right here. So that's where my zipper tab is going to go, or the top of the zipper. And then down here, I have another one. So that's where the zipper stop is going to be, or the bottom of the zipper. So here's my zipper, right side facing up. I'm going to turn it. So now the right side of the zipper is going to go right in the middle of that seam allowance. This tab, you can go ahead and put the tab so it's going up towards the top of the zipper tape. And that is going to be, or the top of the zipper is going to be right at my mark right here. So I'm just going to put my hand on the inside because it's just a little bit easier to work with. Grab some straight pins and start pinning it into place. You're going to make sure that the teeth of the zipper is going to fall right in the middle of your seam line. So I'm just going to carefully roll it down and pin it every few inches. Check. Carefully roll it down and then pin it. So here is my zipper stop right here. So I'm going to make sure that that ends up right at my next mark down here. Once it's all pinned up, you can go ahead and baste your zipper into place. So you're going to be stitching right in the middle of the zipper tape. And you can either do it on your machine or you can do it by hand. If you do it by hand, you have a little bit more control. But I would use a contrasting thread. So something that's going to stand out so we'll be able to see it on the right side of our garment. You're also going to baste across the top of the zipper, down the side. Remember, right in the middle of that tape. When you get to the bottom, you're going to go a little bit past the zipper stop, go across the end of the tape, and then back up down the middle until you get to the top again. Last step is on outside, stitch along basting through all thicknesses as shown using a zipper foot. Remove basting. So I turned my dress right side out. We're looking at the right side of the dress now, and I switched to a zipper foot. You can see my hand basted stitches right here. So the zipper tape is, or the zipper is attached to the inside of my garment. All I'm going to be doing is stitching alongside my basting stitches. And you're definitely going to make sure that you're not stitching any other part of our dress. We're not accidentally stitching the front skirt to the back skirt. We're just stitching the zipper tape to the side seam here. Also make sure that your lining is staying out of the way because we don't want to stitch the lining either. You're going to do a regular whisk stitch. Don't forget to back stitch And then after you finish stitching, you can go ahead and remove your basting stitches, both the basting stitches you put alongside your zipper and also the one that's right in that seam line there. And that is going to open up the zipper so we can use it. Step 27, turn skirt lining down, turning in opening edges to clear zipper teeth. So remainder of skirt lining to upper edge of waist seam. Slip stitch to zipper tape. Now we're going to take care of our lining sections because remember we still have it open here where we put in the zipper. All they want you to do is on each side, you're going to turn this raw edge over. So then when you pull it, like mine is just getting to the zipper teeth, so probably a little bit more, because it should be on the zipper tape, but not close to the teeth because we don't want to take a chance that it's going to get caught in the teeth. So that looks about right there. So I turned it about 5/8 of an inch to a 1/2 inch. You're going to go ahead and pin this. What you're going to do next, and you might want to tuck the bodice back into the skirt. So we have our seam allowance right here at the waist again. You're going to pin the rest of the lining to this seam allowance and you can go ahead and stitch it down. You don't have to stitch it onto the zipper, just probably right before you hit the zipper tape. So that's all going to be attached up here. So you're just going to do a regular whisk stitch at the 5/8 seam allowance. You're going to do the same exact thing on this side. Once it's stitched, you're going to go ahead and fold over this whole edge. Whatever you folded over up here at the top, you're going to continue on. So if I did 5/8 of an inch, I'm going to continue doing that. And then you're going to slip stitch from here down to the bottom. So you're slip stitching the lining to the zipper tape. So we're going to have a nice clean finish on the inside of our dress. I'm going to do it here and then I'm going to do it on this side as well. Step 28, turn bodice lining down, turning in opening edges to clear zipper teeth. Slip stitch to zipper tape and pressed edge over waist seam. So we're essentially going to be doing the same exact thing we just did, except we're going to be doing it to the bodice lining. So we can finally bring the bodice lining down. And you should still have it pressed under 5/8 of an inch at the bottom here. So here's my zipper. Just like I did here, you're going to turn over the raw edge so that it just meets the zipper tape, does not cover the zipper teeth. You would probably want it to be even with what you did for the skirt lining here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do both sides. You're going to slip stitch this edge, so the edge of the bodice lining to the zipper tape only. And I would do the same thing over here. You're going to make sure that your pressed edge is all pressed under and it should overlap with all the seam allowance here. So it's going to cover it up. And then you're going to slip stitch again along this folded edge of the bodice to the top of the skirt lining. And you're going to do that all the way around. So it's going to look nice and seamless right here at the waist. Step 29, baste interfacing to wrong side of belt, sew invisibly along fold lines. Now we're going to be working with our last piece. This is the belt. So you should have cut out one out of our sewing interfacing and then one out of your fabric. You're going to lay your interfacing piece on top of your fabric piece and you're going to baste them together. And I make sure that I baste inside the seam line. So not at the 5/8, but maybe at the 1/2 inch line, just so I don't have to worry about it. It might accidentally be showing once I flip it right side out. Now, if you look at your pattern piece, you'll notice that you have fold line, and we have a fold line here. You're going to want to transfer these lines to either your fabric piece or your interfacing piece. I did it to the interfacing because it's a little bit easier to see. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sewing invisibly along these lines just to mark them and to hold the interfacing and the fabric together. So what I'm going to do is we're going to get a little bit closer so I can show you how to do that. You're going to get your hand needle and some matching thread. So thread that's going to match your fabric. I'm just going to go ahead and use a contrasting thread to my fabric because I want to make sure that you're going to be able to see it. So what you're going to do is I'm actually going to start on the interfacing side. I'm just grabbing a little bit of the interfacing because I want to make sure that my knot is going to be on the inside of the belt on the interfacing side and not show on the right side. So I'm going to just I'm going to go through both layers, my interfacing and my fabric, but I'm just grabbing a little bit of my fabric. And then I'm going to go up about 1/4 of an inch and again go down and grab through both layers, so interfacing and just a little bit of fabric. So the trick is you can make your stitches on the interfacing side a little bit bigger, but once you're grabbing your fabric on the bottom, you're going to make sure that you grab as little as possible. So then the stitches are not going to be that noticeable. So again, I'm grabbing the fabric. And I'm going to do this all along the fold lines, including the short one that's on the end. So if I flip this over, you can just barely see my stitches. This is exactly what we want. So if I was using thread that actually matched this color, you would hardly notice my stitches at all. Step 30, with right sides together, fold belt in half lengthwise, stitch long edge, trim. Your belt is right side facing up. All you're going to do is fold it in half lengthwise. Bring the raw edges together, pin the raw edges, and then you're going to stitch your 5/8 seam allowance on the long edge only, not the short sides and not the folded side, just this side. After you finish stitching it, you're going to go ahead and trim your seam allowance. Step 31, bring seam to center, press open with point of iron, stitch pointed end, trim. So originally when we stitched this, our seam allowance was like this. This is where we stitched it and I went ahead and trimmed it. All they want you to do is you're going to open up your seam allowance and you're going to fold your belt so that the seam allowance ends up in the middle of the belt. At the other end, you should end up with something like this. What they want you to do at this point is you're going to go ahead and you're going to stitch this pointed end right here at your 5/8 seam allowance and then you're going to trim it. Step 32, turn belt press. So here's the pointed end that we just stitched and trimmed. Now the trick to turning this right side out is you're going to take the pointed end and you're just going to tuck it in. So it starts to go inside the casing. Then you're going to need either a skewer with a blunt end or a long crochet hook, and then you're just going to push it and it's going to come through. After you finish turning it all the way, go ahead and press your belt again. Step 33, slip straight end of belt through bar of buckle, turn back along fold line, whip stitch in securely in place, slip stitch side edges. We're going to complete our belt by putting on our buckle. So this is a 1-inch buckle. This is what they ask for in the notions. You're going to have your belt, so the seam side is facing up. This is the underside of the belt, and you're going to flip your buckle so you're looking at the underside of the buckle. Now on the short end, you should have done a sew invisibly for the fold line. Mine's really hard to see because my thread match is pretty good. So what I did is I just marked it with chalk so you know exactly where it is. I'm going to take the end, the straight end here, and I'm going to slip it through my buckle and then I'm going to come back up once I go past this bar. And I'm going to just keep pulling it through. Now you'll see once I get to my fold line here, I'm going to go ahead, fold my buckle or my belt. And instead of just having this raw edge, I'm just going to fold this under. So I have a nice clean folded edge here. And you can go ahead and pin that into place. For the end, this end right here where you have the fold, you can do a whip stitch, and then they want you to do a slip stitch on the sides, this side and this side. So that's going to secure the belt into place with the buckle. So to do a whip stitch, we've already done a whip stitch, but just to give you a reminder again, you're going to do this by hand with a matching thread. I'm coming up right on the fold here of my belt. And I'll cut off the tail end of my knot later, or you could just tuck it in. And then all you're going to do is grab a little bit of the back of the belt. You don't have to do too much. And then you grab the fold. Grab a little bit of the back of the belt and grab the fold. So I'm just going to do this all alongside here, and then I'll do a slip stitch on each side. Step 34, turn up hem, base close to fold, finish raw edge, sew hem in place, easing in fullness if necessary. Press. So it's the last step of making our dress. All we need to do is hem. You need to hem your fabric, and you also need to hem your lining. If you look at a skirt pattern piece, at the bottom, they actually tell you how much. So for the fabric, you're going to hem 2 inches, and your lining, you're going to do 2.5 inches. So you're doing each one separately, but you're going to be doing the same exact thing. So I'm going to show you on the fabric, and then you can just repeat for your lining. So for the fabric, the pattern says we do 2 inches. So I'm going to grab my sewing gauge and my straight pins, and I'm starting here at the raw edge at the bottom of my dress. Make sure you have the wrong side facing up, because you always fold over to the wrong side when doing the hem. I'm going to fold up 2 inches, and for the lining it's going to be 2.5 inches. So I'm using my sewing gauge to get an accurate measurement here, and then I can go ahead, stick in a pin to hold it, and I'm going to do this all the way around the whole hem. Once you finish pinning all the way around, on the bottom folded edge, so this edge down here, you're going to do a basting stitch right alongside that fold line. So that's going to hold it in place so we can finish the top part of the hem. You can go ahead and do the largest stitch on your machine, and you don't have to worry about back stitching. After you finish doing the basting stitch, then you just got to figure out how you want to treat your raw edge here. So you have a couple of different options. Now you're just stitching the raw edge. I'm not actually stitching this top part to the skirt yet, just the raw edge by itself. So if you have a serger, you can go ahead and serge the edge. With my machine, I did an overcast stitch, or you can do a zigzag stitch. If you don't want to see the raw edge, you can just turn it over about 1/4 inch or so. That way you get a nice folded edge at the top here. Once you've decided that, then the only thing left to do is to stitch the top of your hem into place. What you can do is, if you can just do a machine stitch and just stitch directly across. Since I'm working with crepe, which is more of a delicate fabric, and I want it to stay light, I'm going to go ahead and hand sew the hem into place. So I'm just getting some needle and thread here. Now I'm going to come up with my first stitch underneath my raw edge. It's pretty close to the top here, and you can see I'm not grabbing any of my skirt fabric, just the raw edge. Pull that through. And then I'm going to grab a little bit of my skirt fabric. It's kind of similar to sewing invisibly, since the part that you grab with the skirt is the one that's going to be showing on the right side. You just want to make your stitches really small so they don't show that much. And then again, I'm going to grab a little bit of the raw edge coming from behind the raw edge to in front, staying pretty close to the edge. You don't want to be too close to the edge that the thread tears through the raw edge. Maybe about 1/8 of an inch away or less, 1/16. Then grab a little bit of the skirt above that, and then back to the raw edge. After you finish stitching all your hem into place, and don't forget you still need to do the lining if you haven't done that, go ahead and press your hems so they look nice and neat, and you can remove all your basting stitches. After removing your basting and fabric marks, you'll end up with a vintage-inspired dress. This has been Butterick 5880. Enjoy wearing this dress. You're sure to capture the glamour of yesteryear. Make sure to check out our other videos and visit ProfessorPincushion.com to view our complete library with well over 150 sewing video tutorials. New tutorials are released regularly, so make sure to subscribe to be notified of the next release. Thanks for watching!